Chapter 11, The Crown Prince's Guard. "This situation isn't right," Joseph said, frowning in thought. "Have the gangs in the Saint Antoine district gone crazy these last few days?" He immediately ordered Arden, "From now on, everyone will extend their duty hours. Ask everyone to work a bit harder. The performance bonus will be doubled. Night patrols must be especially strengthened. It's highly likely that more things will happen." "Yes." Arden put his hand on his chest and saluted. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the official in charge of police personnel ran in, dripping with sweat. "Your Highness, a large number of police officers have suddenly requested leave. I'd say nearly 100. "Nearly 100?" Arden was stunned. The core police force and support staff of the Saint Antoine district only numbered about 400 in total. That meant a quarter of them had requested leave. "Yes, some say they're sick, some say there's a family emergency, and so on." Joseph took the list of leave requests and quickly looked through it. They were all former members of the police force. The logistics team accounted for the majority, and there were also about 10 detectives. And the one who had requested leave first was Benoit, the second in command of the police station. Joseph's eyes narrowed slightly. There were frequent violent crimes, and he had just called for a full mobilization to maintain public order, and now a large number of people were requesting leave? How could it be such a coincidence? There must be something wrong here. Arden said anxiously, "Your Highness, we need people right now. Joseph turned and handed the list of requests to his attendant. He said coldly, "Amard, you personally take a doctor and verify each one. Anyone whose reason for leave doesn't match the reality will be immediately dismissed." "Yes, Your Highness." "They're digging a hole for me?" Joseph sneered. "Well, that will save a lot of money in salaries. It's only 100 or so people. Do they think this will stop me?" He first ordered the inspectors, Arden, Magany, and the others, to take their teams to maintain public order. Then he signaled to the captain of the Crown Prince's Guard, who was always standing 5 steps away. "Viscount Kexode, how many of my guards are here?" Kexode answered without hesitation, 105, Your Highness." Officially, only 2 or 3 guards followed Joseph around, but in reality, there were always a large number of the Crown Prince's Guard on alert within 300 meters of him. "Transfer 90 of them to the streets with Magany to maintain public order." "Your Highness," Kexode stood ramrod straight, "that's not in line with the rules." "Rules are made by people. Don't be so rigid," Joseph said with a smile. "Besides, you are my guards. Listening to me is the right thing to do." Kexode's face was full of a soldier's unyielding determination. "Your Highness, our duty is to protect your safety. I believe that His Majesty the King would never approve of your proposal." "His Majesty the King?" Joseph suddenly smiled cunningly, turned, and took out Louis XVI letter from the drawer. He handed the last page to the stubborn captain. "I actually have His Majesty's consent." "Ah?" Kexodo was greatly surprised. Joseph pointed to the letter and read, "You just do whatever you want. If any problems arise, I'll take care of them for you," he said. "These are His Majesty's own words. You must obey his orders." Kexodo was stunned. "But..." Joseph then threatened, "If you don't listen to me, I will lead the patrol myself. You just heard what the situation is like outside." "You absolutely cannot go on patrol," Kexodo hurriedly tried to stop him. After a moment of stalemate, he finally said with a bitter face, "Your Highness, this must not be found out by Major Fersen. Also, you must not leave the police station." Fersen was the captain of the palace guard at the Palace of Versailles and Kexodo's direct superior. "It's a deal." Joseph nodded. "Don't worry, I've still got 15 people left. My safety won't be a problem." Kexodo bowed again and exited Joseph's office. He quickly went to the open lot outside the police station, took a whistle from his pocket, and blew 2 loud blasts. In an instant, more than 100 of the Crown Prince's guards, with their swords and muskets, gathered from all directions like a tide and quickly formed 5 columns. Quixote signaled for a few officers to step forward and gave them a few low-voiced instructions. "Yes," the officers shouted in a loud voice. Then they led their men out of the police station at a run. The group also included 10 cavalrymen. In a dilapidated house in the Rue de l'Iris Blanc neighborhood, filled with the stench of feet and the sour smell of vomit, several leaders of the Black Sheep gang were holding their glasses and laughing loudly. "The women from the White Lilac Street are just so feisty. The Saint-Antoine district doesn't have such good stuff." The head leader took a big gulp of wine and glanced at the man with disdain. "Look at you, so uncultured. If you want a whore, the ones in the Louvre district are the best. 30 livres for a night. That chest, tusk. A man with half an ear missing said in a rough voice, "We've made 2,000 livres these last few days. From now on, we can mess with the high-class whores in the Louvre district whenever we want, right?" Someone immediately mocked him. "Valois, you lost all your high-class whore money at the casino, right? Was it 150 livres? Your hands must be cursed." Ha ha ha. Half-Ear grabbed the Paris News next to him, belched, and retorted, "See this? My arson at the shoe store made it into the newspaper. That corrupt cop Simeon will bring us 1,000 livres tomorrow. Who says I'll have no money for the brothel?" "Look at you all. You have no ambition," the head leader said, pointing at the men in front of him with his wine bottle. "You only think about whores. Everyone, put more effort in. Win that 20,000 livres, and I'll take you to play with real noble girls." The gang leader's eyes immediately showed a lewd light, and they all howled, "We'll listen to our leader." "The Haas gang is nothing. That 20,000 livres is ours for sure. I'll take my men and do it tomorrow." Ever since Simeon promised them that they would receive 1,000 livres for every major crime they committed 3 days ago, the Black Sheep gang had given a strict order and a huge reward to their members. They were to cause chaos at any cost. Although many of their men had been arrested by the police these last few days, they had also made a huge profit. The gang leaders fantasized about being rich until they finally fell into a deep sleep in the dead of the night. When the sun rose the next day, they were awakened by a pounding on the door. "Boss, boss, it's bad. One of our brothers is dead." The head leader got out of bed, rubbing his throbbing forehead from the hangover. He said unhappily, "What are you making so much noise for? So someone died? Who did it? The Haas gang or the police?" "Neither." The voice from outside the door was trembling. "It was the Royal Guard, and 3 of them are dead." "The Royal Guard?" The head leader frowned and kicked his men, who were sprawled on the floor. "Get up and see what's going on." A moment later, the 2 leaders grumbled as they left the house, taking a few of their men with the messenger. They hadn't gone far when they saw a team of royal guards walking toward them on the other side of the street. They were wearing exquisite uniforms, tricorn hats with feathers, and royal insignias. They were well equipped and had a magnificent bearing. "What are these people doing in the Saint-Antoine district?" Half-Ear asked nervously. "They look like they're maintaining public safety," the messenger said, his face pale with worry. "There are so many of them. They're on almost every street." Chapter 12. Clues. The men from the Black Sheep gang were talking when they heard a commotion not far away. It seemed someone was being robbed in the street. The royal guards immediately rushed over, at the same time shouting a warning. "Get down immediately, or we have the right to shoot you dead." Two thugs from the Haas gang, however, completely ignored them. They slashed the victim with a knife and ran toward a small alley without looking back. These royal guards were completely different from the police with their simple equipment. Each of them had a musket and wore a breastplate. They immediately lined up, aimed their guns, and the leader shouted again, "Last warning, get down immediately." The robbers, however, gave a vulgar gesture with their hands behind their backs and ran even faster, laughing madly. In their experience, as long as they were bold and ran fast, neither the police nor anyone else could do anything to them. However, this time they were facing France's most elite guard. Fire! With the leader's command, 5 muskets went off at the same time. The 2 rascals in the distance were hit by the musket balls and fell forward. There were several palm-sized holes in their backs, and blood was gushing out. The accurate marksmanship and awe-inspiring, decisive killing intent stunned the men from the Black Sheep gang, who shrank back. They looked at each other, didn't even bother to check on their dead subordinates, and hurriedly ran back to report to their boss. The Crown Prince's guard, like an invincible behemoth, swept through the entire Saint Antoine district. Just after 10 a.m., 6 gang members had already been shot by them. The 2 gangs who had been arrogant and causing trouble everywhere were immediately demoralized. This was an order Joseph had given to the guards. If they encounter a crime and couldn't catch the criminal, they were to shoot them dead immediately. A serious illness required strong medicine. If he didn't use blood to deter these gang members, who knows how many more citizens would die? It was the era of a monarchy, so there was no need to talk about the personal rights of criminals. There was no room for bleeding hearts here. The leader of the Haas gang hid in his lair, watching the tall, muscular royal guards walk down the street through a gap in the curtains. Their presence made his eyelids twitch. The door to the house was knocked on from time to time with news from his men that some of the gang members had been arrested or shot dead. In just one day, he had lost 17 of his men. His heart was bleeding. "I'm just a small-time thug. Is it really necessary to send in the army to suppress me?" The Black Sheep gang reacted a bit faster and pulled everyone back by noon, only losing a little over 10 men. For the next 2 days, there were no more violent crimes in the Saint Antoine district. Although Simeon's payment was high, the royal guards were truly killing people. What was the use of earning a lot of money if you couldn't spend it? The news that the gang members had quieted down was sent back to the police station. Everyone was excited and praised the Crown Prince's decisiveness and methods, as well as the might of the royal guards. Joseph didn't care about their flattery. He knew very well that the guards had only temporarily deterred the gang members with their swift and forceful methods. It wouldn't be long before these gangs found a loophole. After all, the guards were not familiar with this place and didn't know anything about criminal investigation. Moreover, many of the guards were knights with titles. If they were made to do patrol work all the time, they would quickly become lax due to low morale. You can't be on guard for 1,000 days against a thief. If the mastermind behind this chaos wasn't found, there would be a big case sooner or later. Inspector Arden knocked on the door and entered the room. He saluted and said, "Your Highness, we've interrogated everyone we've arrested. They're all small fry, but many of them mentioned that for every crime they committed, someone would give their boss 1,000 livres, and they would also get a good share." Joseph frowned. These guys were indeed committing crimes for money. 1,000 livres a time? This mastermind was truly a big spender. He ordered Arden to interrogate them more carefully. Just then, an officer from the guards hurried in and saluted respectfully. "Your Highness, we've interrogated everyone we've arrested. They're all small fry, but many of them mentioned that for every crime they committed, someone would give their boss 1,000 livres, and they would also get a good share." Joseph frowned. These guys were indeed committing crimes for money. 1,000 livres a time. This mastermind was truly a big spender. He ordered Arden to interrogate them more carefully. Just then, an officer from the guards hurried in and saluted respectfully. "Your Highness, we've interrogated everyone we've arrested. They're all small fry, but many of them mentioned that for every crime they committed, someone would give their boss 1,000 livres, and they would also get a good share." Joseph frowned. These guys were indeed committing crimes for money. 1,000 livres a time. This mastermind was truly a big spender. He ordered Arden to interrogate them more carefully. Just then, an officer from the guards hurried in and saluted respectfully. "Your Highness, my men just arrested a man named Valois. His identity seems to be a little bit special." "Valois?" Arden was immediately excited. "He's the second in command of the Black Sheep gang. How did you catch him?" The officer said, "He was fighting with someone in a casino. When I led my team there, he tried to run. My men shot and killed 3 of his subordinates. If he hadn't told us his name, he would have probably been shot dead as well." Arden swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He felt a little pity for the thugs of the Black Sheep gang, and then looked at Joseph. "Your Highness, Valois might know something. I'll go and interrogate him now." Less than an hour later, Magoni rushed back. He didn't even have time to wipe the blood off his body. He handed a statement to Joseph. "Your Highness, we've made a big catch." Joseph saw from the Black Sheep gang leader's confession that a man named Raymond had been paying them to cause chaos, 1,000 livres each time. A month later, whoever caused a bigger mess, them or the Haas gang, would receive another 20,000 livres. He frowned slightly. What does this Raymond do? Arden shook his head. The police clerk next to him exclaimed in surprise, "He's Mr. Simeon's cousin." Simeon? Joseph felt like the name was a bit familiar. The clerk said, "He's the former police commissioner of this district." Joseph immediately understood. No wonder nearly 100 police officers had taken leave at the same time. It turned out that the mastermind behind the scenes was their old superior. Everything made sense now. Arden was a former member of the civilian patrol team who had been promoted. He didn't understand all these twists and turns. He looked at Joseph with a questioning look. "Your Highness, should we arrest Simeon?" Joseph was about to nod, but he suddenly thought of something and asked the clerk, "Excuse me, what was Simeon's previous salary?" "It should be 30 livres a month, Your Highness." "Is he from a big family?" "No, Your Highness. Mr. Simeon's father seemed to be a minor civil servant. His family background is ordinary." Joseph narrowed his eyes. With his salary, it would take him more than 50 years to save 20,000 livres. Where did he get such a huge sum of money? Arden was stunned. "Your Highness, you mean?" Joseph said slowly, "There should be someone else behind him." Arden thought for a moment and said, "Your Highness, I remember Valois mentioning that Raymond showed them a bank statement for 20,000 livres to prove his ability to pay. It was from the Havre Bank." "This might be an important clue." Joseph nodded and took out a map. He found that Havre was a small bank with only 2 branches in Paris. "Earl Aymard, you and Arden." He thought about it and shook his head. "Forget it. I'll go myself." At the Havre Bank branch closer to City Hall, the bank manager initially refused to let them check the account. It wasn't until Joseph revealed his identity and threatened to have the secret police investigate if they didn't cooperate that the manager finally gave in. At the Havre Bank branch closer to City Hall, the bank manager initially refused to let them check the account. It wasn't until Joseph revealed his identity and threatened to have the secret police investigate if they didn't cooperate that the manager finally gave in. Simeon's account was very simple. He had only a few transactions here. He cashed a 30,000 livre draft and then divided the money into several parts and deposited it into the bank. One of the deposits was exactly 20,000 livres. Joseph secretly sighed that the people of this era had a very weak awareness of financial tracking. He then got the information he wanted most. The payer of that draft was Paris Police Superintendent Viscount Gazot. End of this chapter. Chapter 13. The Deal. Joseph left 2 of his guards to keep an eye on the bank manager to prevent any information leaks and then led his men out of Havery Bank. Arden said anxiously, "Your Highness, I'll take some men to arrest Guizot." Joseph raised his hand to stop him. Guizot only gave Simeon 30,000 livres. There's no evidence at all to prove his involvement. Then we'll arrest Simeon. Maybe he will confess to Guizot. Joseph hadn't expected the man behind this to be the Paris police superintendent. He frowned and fell into deep thought. Guizot's status was special. If he refused to admit anything, it would be difficult to convict him based on Simeon's testimony alone. Aymard glanced at the darkening sky and said to Joseph, "Your Highness, it's getting dark. We should head back to our residence first." A flash of inspiration struck Joseph upon hearing this. The law was arrested near dusk, so the news shouldn't reach City Hall until tomorrow morning, right? Arden nodded. He's just a thug. No one would care about him. That's good. Joseph quickly got into the carriage, leaned over the small table, and wrote a letter. He handed it to his guard captain. "Viscount Kexout, please send someone back to the Palace of Versailles to deliver this to Her Majesty the Queen. It must be done quickly." "Yes, Your Highness." At 4 a.m., Count Hermann, Queen Marie's secretary, yawned as he arrived at the Saint Antoine District Police Station with Antoine, the commissioner of the secret police. Before the two could even salute, Joseph warmly had some hot cocoa brought out and pulled them down to sit. "Your Highness, why did you summon us so urgently? Is there something important?" "I do have something I need to trouble you two with." Joseph leaned forward and began to explain his plan. Herman's eyes widened. This, if it doesn't work out. "Leave it to me. There will be no surprises." Antoine, however, seemed very confident. "Your Highness's plan is excellent. I'm already planning to add this to the secret police training curriculum." Joseph bowed to them. "Then I'll leave it in your capable hands." "It is our honor to be of service to Your Highness." As the sky began to lighten, Guizot yawned and got into his carriage. He tossed his walking stick to a servant and waved lazily. "Let's go." The carriage slowly started moving, rumbling along the cobblestone road. It was still a bit of a distance from Guizot's house to City Hall. He was about to lean back in his seat for another short nap when he suddenly heard the coachman shout, "Whoa!" and the carriage abruptly stopped. What's going on? Guizot pulled open the carriage window in frustration, wanting to see what was happening. The carriage door was yanked open. 3 burly men wearing torn leather hats, black sleeveless jackets, and smelling of foul odors appeared outside the carriage. Guizot's bodyguard hurriedly reached for his sword, but the Dussault knife of the man named Valois was already at his throat. A man with a gaunt face and protruding knuckles gestured to the outside of the carriage and said in a low voice, "Everyone out." The servants and bodyguard scrambled out of the carriage. Guizot was about to move but was held down. "You stay put." Then the 3 burly men jumped into the carriage. The man with the knife closed the door and said to the coachman, "Keep going, pretend nothing happened." The carriage started moving again. The fear on Guizot's face immediately faded. He leaned back and said in a cold voice, "You're Valois, aren't you? Who sent you here?" Yes, as the police superintendent of Paris, he still had some memory of the leaders of the city's famous gangs. He had seen the man in the middle with half his left ear missing once last year, the second in command of the Black Sheep Gang. Valois' eyes darted to the skinny, middle-aged man on his left. He lowered his head and said evasively, Let my man talk to you." The skinny man rubbed the stubble on his face with his knife and squinted at Guizot. "Mr. Guizot, our boss wants to make a deal with you." You? Gazelle laughed with disdain. What right do you have to make a deal with me? Get out of my carriage. The skinny man seemed not to have heard him and continued as if talking to himself. About that 20,000 leaves, you will definitely regret it if you don't listen. Gazelle drew out his words. 20,000 leaves? I don't know what you're talking about. Why do you need to hide it? The skinny man smiled. Simeon went to a brothel with our boss. After he got drunk, he told him many things, like, for example, the task you gave him. That fool, Gazelle muttered, turning his head to look out the window. Whatever it is, go talk to Simeon. No, he can't make this decision. Our boss wants you to pay that 20,000 leaves directly to us. Gazelle looked amused. What kind of crazy talk is this? I'm sure you've also heard that a large number of the Royal Guard have arrived in the Saint Antoine district recently. No one dares to cause trouble there now. Gazelle's expression changed slightly. So? What Simeon asked for will be very difficult to accomplish for both us and the Haas gang, the skinny man said, holding up 2 fingers. But our boss wants to earn that 20,000 leaves. Gazelle laughed. You want the money without doing the job. No, we're not doing it, the skinny man said. Instead, we'll do one big job that's worth 20,000 livres and then stop. Gazelle was immediately intrigued. He had heard about the Royal Guard's sweep of the gangs in the Saint Antoine district and was worrying about it. When he heard this, he was suddenly interested. What do you plan to do? What do we plan to do? The skinny man shook his head. No, it's what you want us to do. Gazelle stopped pretending and said with a sinister smile, if you can do something that will make the police of the Saint Antoine district lose face, that will be on the front page of every newspaper. That will have all of Paris talking about it for a year. I might consider giving you the 20,000 livres directly. The skinny man thought for a moment and said, what do you think of this? We'll find an opportunity to sneak into the Saint Antoine district police station, kill 10 police officers, and then set the station on fire. That's a good idea. Gazelle stroked his chin, a smile on his lips. With the police station burned down, wouldn't the Crown Prince be humiliated? The municipal commissioner would definitely be very satisfied. Let's do it. The skinny man nodded and said slowly, let me repeat the agreement. You will give us 20,000 livres to hire us to kill 10 police officers and burn down the police station. Is that correct? Although Gazelle felt the phrasing was a bit strange, the content was correct. He just assumed the thug didn't know how to talk and nodded subconsciously. Yes, that's it. No one forced you to make this decision, right? What? Of course not. The skinny man looked at him, smiling. I'm very curious, Mr. Gazelle. Why would you spend such a large sum of money to do something that brings you no profit at all? Gazelle's face darkened. You fool! That's not for you to ask. Now get out of my carriage immediately and go do what you're supposed to do in the Saint Antoine district. I do have a serious job to do now, the skinny man said with a smile, putting away his Dussault knife. He took off his torn leather hat and ripped off his beard. Then he pulled a cast-iron handcuff from behind his back and dangled it in front of him. Gazelle, you are suspected of conspiring to murder police officers, burn down a police station, and threaten the safety of the Crown Prince. I officially arrest you in the name of the Royal Police. The Royal Police was a more elegant name for the secret police, equivalent to the FBI in later generations. They had very wide-ranging authority, including the power to make direct arrests. End of this chapter. Chapter 14. The Net Closes. Guizot's face froze. He looked at Valois. "Keep your man in line. What nonsense is he spouting?" The carriage suddenly stopped. The latter showed a smile that was uglier than a cry and slightly turned sideways. Only then did Guizot see a dagger pressed against his lower back. Guizot's pupils shrank. He suddenly shot up, about to grab the door handle, but the skinny man was faster. The moment his butt left the seat, his right hand had already clamped his neck, pinning him against the backrest. Guizot struggled hard and screamed hysterically. "Let go of me! I am the Paris police superintendent! You have no evidence! You can't arrest me!" The man sitting on Valois' right, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke. "I, Ambroise de Herman, witnessed everything just now on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen. I can prove you are guilty." The carriage door was opened from the outside. Arden and a police officer pointed their guns at Guizot, their expressions filled with indignation. "I was driving the carriage just now. We also heard everything and can testify." Guizot immediately went limp. In the open area of the Saint Antoine District Police Station, Joseph watched a large group of police officers run past in formation, nodding to them continuously. The police officers responded with loud slogans. Arden was extremely excited, still chattering to the Crown Prince about what had happened in the morning, completely unable to stop. Viscount Antoine's men were waiting at the street corner and took Guizot away immediately. I think he must have been taken to the secret police, the royal police's interrogation room. I followed another team to search Guizot's house. I noticed a bulge at the head of the bed, and I knew something was wrong. After we smashed it open, we indeed found a hidden compartment. Joseph had already heard this story once. He smiled and said, "And then you found that notebook. You've made a great contribution this time." Guizot's notebook contained information on the main gangs and a large number of criminals in the Saint Antoine district. The last few pages of the notebook were records of Guizot providing a protective umbrella for these people and taking black money. Joseph immediately mobilized all his police force and, with the cooperation of his own guards, followed the clues to the lairs of those criminals. The Saint Antoine district experienced a very turbulent day. The members of various gangs and the criminals were caught off guard and ran around the streets in a panic. But they were quickly knocked to the ground by riot forks. A few who resisted stubbornly were shot. The arrests continued for 2 days. When the citizens heard the news, they very consciously stayed at home to cooperate with the police's actions. Some brave people even took up sticks and helped the police intercept criminals at the street corners. The cells of the Saint Antoine District Police Station were quickly filled, and the subsequent criminals were all sent to the Bastille. Such a huge commotion attracted almost all the journalists in Paris. On Rue des Blancs-Manteaux, a middle-aged man with messy hair, deep nasolabial folds, and a pensive expression as if he were contemplating life at all times, frowned as he looked across the road. A team of the Royal Guard was passing by, leading 7 or 8 people with their hands tied, looking dejected and with blood on their noses and mouths. The young man next to him said nervously, "Mr. Marat, you really didn't need to come here yourself. It seems quite dangerous." "It's fine," Marat waved his hand. "Without being on the scene, you can never know the truth." He quickly walked into a grocery store, bought a few things, and pointed to the Royal Guard in the distance, asking the owner, "Do you know what they are doing? Arresting political prisoners?" The owner rolled his eyes at him and said grumpily, "What political prisoners? Those tied up are from the Viper gang. They've never done anything good." Saying this, he rolled up his sleeve to reveal a scar. "See, I was beaten by the Viper gang last year. Before the Crown Prince brought the new police force, they used to extort 5 livres from me every month. May God bless the Crown Prince. These hateful guys are finally arrested. Now I have money to buy some butter for my children." Marat habitually took out his notebook and started writing. "Can you tell me about this new police force?" Of course, the owner put down his work and sized him up. You're a journalist, right? Can you write my thanks to the Crown Prince in the newspaper? Yes, I can. After chatting for a while, with his head full of praises for the Crown Prince, Marat left the grocery store suspiciously. He stopped a passerby on the street and asked again what the police and guards were doing. He then got a similar answer to the one the store owner had given. After interviewing 7 or 8 people, visiting the security post on Rue des Blancs-Manteaux, and even directly questioning the arrested criminals, he finally began to believe that the royal family had actually done something very beneficial for the common people. This was very abnormal. In his impression, the royal family and those great nobles had always only exploited and bullied the common people. But to eliminate evil for the people without even levying a fee for it, this was absolutely the first time. But he was a person who respected facts. After getting a large amount of first-hand interview material, he immediately returned to the inn and wrote the headline for tomorrow's news article, "Crown Prince's Police Reforms Show Remarkable Results, Eradicating the Roots of Crime in the Saint Antoine District in One Fell Swoop." A few gray-black carriages drove along the north bank of the Seine toward the Palace of Versailles. In the middle carriage, Joseph coughed. He felt like he was sitting on a pile driver, and his body was about to fall apart from the shaking. He rubbed his dizzy and aching forehead, thinking to himself, "I need to quickly come up with spring suspension, and preferably tires. I'll be in carriages a lot in the future, so I don't want to be shaken into an illness by this thing." Yesterday, he had received a letter of commendation from the cabinet, praising his achievement of clearing out the criminals in the Saint Antoine district in one fell swoop and asking him to return to the Palace of Versailles to report on his duties. At the end of the letter were the signatures of the king and queen. Joseph smiled and shook his head. To report on one's duties just over 20 days after taking office, he must have set a record. He guessed that Louis XVI and the Queen missed their son and were just using this as an excuse to get him back. However, this coincided with his own plan. Joseph had no intention of staying in the police bureau forever. His primary goal had always been to save France's finances and prevent the country from going bankrupt and having his head lopped off by rioters. He could use this achievement of fighting crime to ask the Queen for the position of assistant to the Minister of Finance. Let's see what reason those people in the cabinet could use to object. Speaking of which, he had to thank Guizot for being able to achieve such a great result in the Saint Antoine district. If Guizot hadn't spent tens of thousands of livres to create chaos, he would never have been able to launch a crackdown on crime and evil action that sensationalized all of Paris. Joseph's gaze swept over the few pages of paper in his hand. It was Guizot's confession and interrogation records from the secret police. He learned from this that his reorganization of the police force had affected the police force practice of selling police positions to amass wealth, which had led to Guizot's insane revenge. Under the stimulus of the 20,000 livres, the gang members in the Saint Antoine district killed a dozen citizens and injured even more in just a few days, and the situation almost spiraled out of control. Joseph couldn't help but take a deep breath. If Simeon hadn't lacked awareness of financial forensics, he would have been completely overwhelmed, and his police reforms might have been abandoned halfway through. End of this chapter. Chapter 15. Political Capital. Joseph felt a sense of fear. Now, in the process of his reorganization of France, no matter whether it was the bureaucratic class, the nobility, the church, capitalists, or foreign powers, if he wasn't careful, he would touch on their interests and be met with a frenzied backlash. In other words, things like what Guizot did, acting maliciously in secret, would become endless in the future, and he would be unable to defend against them all. How could he avoid falling into a passive position? He looked out the window, his fingers tapping on the armrest of his seat as he fell into thought. To avoid being secretly harmed, it would be best to be able to discover potential threats in advance and get wind of plots against him. It would also be best to have professional personnel to help him nip threats in the bud. To do all of this, he would need a large number of spies to gather information for him, and a command center to analyze and summarize the information, come up with a solution, and then, based on his instructions, send people to deal with the problems. As he thought of this, several names immediately came to mind: the CIA, the KGB, and MI6. If he had such a professional intelligence agency under his control, he wouldn't be like a blind and deaf man when faced with various plots from different forces. This would ensure that the process of his reorganization of France wouldn't be interrupted. Actually, France did have a ready-made Secret Service organization, the Secret Police. However, Joseph knew that this organization was completely useless. All they did was read letters, eavesdrop on conversations, and carry out aimless surveillance. In fact, they weren't even good at those things and were often caught, which gave the secret police a very bad reputation. Therefore, it was most reliable to build his own intelligence team from scratch. Not only could he use advanced concepts from his past life to guide and train them, but their loyalty would also be higher. But the secret police organization had already incurred the wrath of all of France. If he were to create another one, he would likely immediately become a target. Joseph couldn't help but frown. How could he do it without making a fuss? And where would the people come from? Ultimately, he was still isolated and lacked political capital. It was difficult. The long period of thinking started to give him a headache, accompanied by a fit of coughing. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. His small body had a chronic lung condition. Recently, the poor living conditions in the Saint-Antoine district had caused the illness to relapse. It seemed that physical exercise would also have to be put on the agenda. The carriage suddenly began to slow down. Joseph looked at Aymard. "Are we there?" "I don't think so, Your Highness." The attendant poked his head out the window and asked in a loud voice, "What's going on?" A guard from the front carriage quickly ran back, put his hand to his chest, and reported, "Your Highness, the Minister of the Interior, Count Maurepas, happened to be passing by and said he wanted to greet you in person." Happened to be passing by? Joseph looked at Aymard with a questioning gaze. Aymard leaned closer. "Your Highness, it might be about Guizot." When Joseph heard their relationship, his heart skipped a beat. He was worried about lacking influence in the cabinet, and this might be a chance for him to gain some political capital. He nodded to the guard. "Please invite Count Maurepas into my carriage." "Yes, Your Highness." A moment later, a 50-year-old man with long, wavy brown hair, thin eyes, and a powdered face came to the carriage. He handed his walking stick to a servant and then bowed deeply. "I never expected to meet your Royal Highness here. I am truly fortunate." Joseph politely returned the bow, invited him into the carriage, and pushed the pastries on the small table toward him. "These were sent by Her Majesty the Queen. Please have a taste." "Thank you, Your Highness." Maurepas picked up a pastry as if he were deeply honored and exaggeratedly praised it. He then acted as if he had just remembered something and gestured for his servant to bring over a wooden box. He smiled. "I recently acquired a beautiful dagger that suits Your Highness's heroic temperament. I would like to give it to you." "Oh, then I must thank you very much, Count Maurepas." After Joseph took the wooden box, Maurepas pretended to make small talk. "Your Highness, many things have been happening in Paris lately." "Indeed." "The actions of some officials are truly regrettable." Maurepas, a high-ranking cabinet official, behaved with a great deal of humility. He sighed and said, "Actually, Guizot used to be a very upright person. Who knew he would?" Joseph opened the wooden box and interrupted him with a smile. "Please speak your mind without reservation." "Yes, yes." Mauripaz's face was full of sincerity. I recommended Guizot in the past because he was competent. You know, I was completely unaware of the things he did, or I would have done my best to stop him. Fortunately, Your Highness is brilliant and saw through his vicious tricks, preventing this disaster. Guizot had been his student, and he had personally promoted him to the position of police superintendent. With such a huge scandal now, it was hard for him to completely dissociate himself from it. Although Mauripaz was a high-ranking official, Guizot was in the hands of the secret police, and he still didn't know the specific situation. He also didn't dare to ask the Queen directly, so he waited on the road back to the Palace of Versailles, wanting to test the waters with the young Crown Prince. Your Highness, what are the charges against Guizot this time? Joseph seemed very interested in the jewel-encrusted saber, rubbing it repeatedly as he said casually, I heard it was inciting rebellion. Mauripaz's body stiffened. Rebellion? That was a serious crime of subverting the government. If it were confirmed, there was no way he would not be implicated. He forced a laugh. He wouldn't be that bold. Is that so? Joseph put down the saber and handed him the confession from the table. The royal police sent this over this morning. Guizot commanded a large number of criminals to attack the Saint Antoine District Police Station. Oh, I was still in the police station at the time. Mauripaz glanced at the papers and immediately broke into a cold sweat. Although he didn't think Guizot had a motive for a rebellion, based on this evidence, it made sense to classify it as such. He was so flustered he didn't know where to put his hands. He cursed Guizot fiercely and then looked at Joseph with a bitter face. Your Highness, is there any room for negotiation here? Joseph blinked and said, Some people say Guizot was inciting a rebellion, but I'm not so sure. After all, I'm the one who knows the situation best.
Yes, yes, Mauripaz nodded repeatedly. Please, you must explain the real situation to Her Majesty the Queen.
Oh, let's talk about that in a few days, Joseph said, picking up the saber again and waving it a few times. I'm busy preparing to prove to my mother that I'm capable of being the assistant to the Minister of Finance. The topic changed so quickly that Mauripaz was stunned for a moment, but he quickly remembered that the Crown Prince had proposed becoming the assistant to the Minister of Finance at a cabinet meeting. He quickly said in a loud voice, No one is more suitable for this position than Your Highness. The cabinet meeting will be held the day after tomorrow. I will propose that you be appointed assistant to the Minister of Finance. Oh, I can also go and persuade Archbishop Brienne to support you. Brienne was the current Minister of Finance and also the Chief Minister, the most important official under the king. Chapter 16. The Girl's New Fashion. Speaking with an intelligent person was easy. Joseph smiled and nodded. Guizot should be charged with hiring people to murder and harboring criminals. I will explain the situation clearly to Her Majesty the Queen. Your Highness is truly a champion of justice, Mauripaz said, placing his hand on his chest and bowing. Please believe that I will always be loyal to their Majesties the King and Queen, and always loyal to you. Thank you for your loyalty, and also for your saber. I like it very much. A huge weight was lifted from Mauripaz's heart. After another round of pleasantries, he hurriedly took his leave. Joseph suddenly remembered that the Minister of the Interior was in charge of managing all municipalities and overseeing the police. Therefore, it was Mauripaz who decided who would be the Paris police superintendent. Joseph's own efforts would be focused on finance in the future, so he needed a reliable person to help him carry out the police reforms. Additionally, he could use the police department as a cover for the intelligence agency he was planning to create. So he raised his hand to stop Mauripaz and asked, By the way, I would like to ask you, who will take over as Paris police superintendent?
Morapus immediately thought of the Crown Prince's police reforms and answered without hesitation, "That, of course, will have to wait for your Highness's opinion." Joseph nodded in satisfaction. "Good. I will do my best to give you a recommendation. Also, I firmly believe that Guizot's actions had absolutely nothing to do with you. Please take your time." "Thank you for your trust, Your Highness." Morapus bowed deeply, took 3 steps back, and turned to leave. After walking a dozen or so meters, he finally let out a long sigh. He no longer dared to think of the Crown Prince as an easy-to-fool boy. Just now in the carriage, the Crown Prince had always been in control of the conversation, appearing calm and at ease. He actually had the same feeling as when he was facing Louis XV. He ordered his coachman to return to the Palace of Versailles and muttered to himself, "He is indeed a son of divine favor. It seems I should keep some distance from the Duke of Orleans from now on." Joseph's carriage was also back on the road. After another hour of travel, a melodious bugle call suddenly came from ahead, accompanied by the brisk rhythm of military drums. Aymard whispered a reminder, "Your Highness, we have arrived." The carriage quickly stopped. 2 unfamiliar nobles came forward. One opened the door and waited for the Crown Prince to get out, while the other set up a wooden step. "Your Royal Highness, welcome back." Joseph got out of the carriage, nodded to the 2 of them, and then looked out. He saw over 100 members of the honor guard in crisp uniforms lined up on both sides, their swords raised to the sky. And in the marble courtyard in front of the main gate of the Palace of Versailles, hundreds of nobles were gathered, surrounding the staircase, looking at him with eager anticipation. When the crowd saw the Crown Prince appear, they immediately erupted in cheers, drowning out the music of the band. Joseph was a little surprised. "What is this for?" The 2 nobles hurriedly said, "Your Highness, their Majesties the King and Queen are here to welcome you in person." Joseph rubbed his forehead. This was such a grand scene, as if he had returned in triumph from a war against an enemy country. It was no wonder. Ever since Louis XVI ascended to the throne, he had been focused on his locks and had not done anything that would garner him public attention. The Queen was a woman, and her ability was mediocre. She could barely handle affairs of state, and rumors of her extravagance caused the prestige of the royal family to decline with each passing day. This time, the Crown Prince's stunning achievement of putting the Paris police superintendent in prison and single-handedly clearing out almost all the criminals in the Saint-Antoine district had already become the focal point of conversation throughout Paris. With their son proving himself so capable, how could Louis XVI and the Queen not make a big deal of it? And so this unprecedented welcoming ceremony came to be. In fact, many other nobles who were not qualified to stand in the marble courtyard were eagerly waiting inside the Palace of Versailles. Joseph walked between the honor guard, looking up and seeing a beautiful and graceful woman standing on the top step, wearing a long purple silk dress with a wide skirt, a white sable fur shawl, and a tall hairstyle with 2 long feathers. It was Queen Marie. Next to her, shrinking half of his body behind her, was the chubby and pale King of France. He wore a long blue velvet coat embroidered with fine silver threads, a black tricorn hat, and black calfskin high-heeled shoes. His expression was a little nervous. He was the famous locksmith and social anxiety sufferer, Louis XVI. Joseph hurriedly quickened his pace and walked toward the 2 of them. As he walked, the nobles on both sides bowed their heads and saluted him. In front of the main gate of the Palace of Versailles, it was as if a huge, colorful wave was slowly surging toward the top of the stairs. Just as Queen Marie showed a gentle smile and was about to open her arms to welcome her son, a young noblewoman to Joseph's right, who was wearing a low-cut dress, seemed to freeze. Her pale body swayed, and she fell forward. Joseph reflexively raised his hand to support her, asking with concern, "Are you all right?" The girl closed her eyes and huddled her cold body into his embrace. The eyes of the young noblewomen around them immediately shot fire, and they secretly gritted their teeth. That bitch Alyssa, she's using such a despicable trick to get close to the crown prince. The old crown prince had been unremarkable, even a bit of a failure. Although he was of high status, he had a very bad reputation among the young noblewomen. But now, stories of the crown prince's knowledge that shocked Lagrange, wiping out the criminals of the Saint Antoine district in 2 days, and solving a murder case in 3 minutes, had become increasingly fantastical among the young women of Versailles. Talking about the crown prince and collecting news about him had become the new fashion among the young girls of Versailles. Almost 2.5 out of every 3 sentences they spoke were about the crown prince. The son of divine favor had become the dream lover of all the girls. Even if they knew their status was too low and they couldn't marry him, they would be satisfied just being his lover. The tall girl on the left secretly thought to herself, I can do that too. She immediately dropped her fan next to her feet and let out a soft cry. My dress is too tight. I can't breathe. She swayed her head and fell toward the crown prince. Joseph quickly used his left hand to support her. The air around them was immediately filled with the smell of vinegar. In an instant, cries of, "It's so cold," and "I'm suddenly so dizzy," rose and fell, and more than a dozen soft, warm bodies fell toward him. Just as Joseph was at a loss, his guard captain, Kexode, took a few steps forward and, with one hand, lifted a girl from Joseph's embrace. He then shouted at the guards behind him, "Quickly, help the young ladies up." Yes. The noblewomen who had been unconscious squinted and saw the 5 big, burly guards rushing toward them. They immediately broke free from the laws of gravity, miraculously stood up straight, and resumed their impossibly dignified posture. End of this chapter.
Chapter 17. Aspirin for Youngsters. Oh, my dear darling. After Joseph bowed, Queen Marie hugged him tightly. I think about you day and night. Are you hurt? Look how thin you've gotten. You must bring a chef with you every time you leave home from now on. Louis XVI also came over, but he looked at the dense crowd around him and couldn't utter a single word. He only gave his son an encouraging look. Come inside, it's cold out. The Queen dragged Joseph into the palace of Versailles. She glanced back at the noblewomen who were doing all sorts of tricks to get his attention, and then she turned to whisper in her son's ear, "Joseph, you're also at the age to be engaged. Which country's princess do you like, the Spanish princess or the Savoy one?" Joseph didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What engagement! This young body of mine has just entered puberty. Please don't torture me. He quickly turned to Louis XVI to change the subject. Father, your salamander fountain. Louis XVI glanced at the people around him and answered with a non sequitur. Joseph, pick a girl you like. Even if she's not a princess, I'll support you. Queen Marie gave him a helpless look and took her son's arm. My dear, I've also prepared a grand ball for you. She suddenly stopped. Why is your hand so hot? She reached out to touch his forehead. My God, you have a fever. She turned to her maid, de Bernina, and shouted, Quick, go find Dr. Lamarck. Your Majesty, Dr. Lamarck went to Paris this morning. Then Dr. Lasserre, be quick. Queen Marie kissed her son's hot forehead, so anxious that tears were about to fall. You must bring a doctor with you every time you leave home from now on. Joseph felt a wave of warmth in his heart and quickly comforted her. I just have a low fever. I'm fine. But then he had a fit of coughing. You say you're fine? You're very sick. Go rest and let a doctor have a good look at you.
When the young women around them heard that the crown prince was ill, they anxiously crowded around him and, together with the queen, practically carried him to his chambers. After Joseph lay down on the velvet-covered bed, the queen looked at Louis XVI with a hint of resentment. Her eyes seemed to say, "Look at you. If you had half the ability of the Sun King, your son wouldn't have to work himself into such a state for the country." A short while later, a small, middle-aged doctor entered the room, panting. At the queen's urging, he took Joseph's temperature and performed an examination. He then bowed to Louis XVI and the queen. "Your Majesties, the crown prince's pneumonia has worsened. He has a fever of 37.9 degrees. I believe we must perform a bloodletting immediately." "Good, please be quick." When Joseph heard this, his face went dark. Bloodletting? With this small body of his, were they trying to hasten his death? Of course, he didn't blame the doctor. After all, medicine in this era was almost like alchemy played by barbers, and bloodletting was a common treatment. It was a known fact that a few years later, the American President Washington would be bled to death. He immediately pretended to be uncomfortable and asked for quiet, sending away the visiting nobles as well as the king and queen. Once the chamber door was closed, he immediately got out of bed and said to Dr. Lasserre, "No bloodletting. No matter how sick I am in the future, never use bloodletting."
"Your Highness, I can't do that." Joseph tried to persuade him repeatedly, but when the doctor still refused to compromise, he reluctantly took the Persian saber that Maurepas had given him from the table and said in a low voice, "I don't want to repeat myself. No bloodletting. Do you understand?" The blade's reflection gave off a cold light. Lasserre's pupils shrank. He immediately remembered the crown prince's infamous reputation, chasing the police superintendent through half of Paris and personally arresting him, leading 90 guards in a battle against hundreds of gang members and annihilating all the criminals. Yes, after being passed on through many people, the news had become this. Lasserre swallowed a mouthful of saliva and nodded repeatedly, "As you command." He then said cautiously, "But you still have a fever." Joseph felt dizzy and tired when he heard this. He thought to himself that it would be great if he had penicillin, a powerful weapon against pneumonia, but that wasn't something that could be made easily. What about an antipyretic that could be made in a short time? He suddenly remembered a documentary he had seen about aspirin, which had a method for extracting salicin, a substance equivalent to the youthful version of aspirin. Fortunately, he had a good memory and remembered the main process. Although salicin only had a small anti-inflammatory function, it was very effective at reducing fever. The most important thing was that it was simple to make and could be produced in half a day. He immediately looked at Lasserre and said, "Excuse me, are you familiar with drug extraction?" The latter immediately showed a confident expression. "Yes, Your Highness, I even taught a class on it at the university." "That's great." Joseph immediately took out a pen and paper, wrote down the preparation process for salicin, and then explained it to him in detail. Crush the willow bark and steam it dry. Add a small amount of quicklime, then soak it in alcohol in an alkaline environment for 1.5 hours. Boil, filter, evaporate, and concentrate. Adjust the extracted liquid to an alkaline state, soak again, repeat, until crystals precipitate.
That's about it. How long do you think it will take to make it? Lasserre's eyes widened. The professionalism the crown prince showed in his words was definitely no less than his own. The son of divine favor was indeed worthy of his name. He then discussed the preparation process in detail with Joseph, making sure nothing was missed. He then pondered, "The Royal Alchemy Lab has everything we need. If everything goes smoothly, it can be finished before 4 p.m. Your Highness, forgive me for being so blunt, but I have never heard of this medicine. Are you sure it's safe?" "Yes," Joseph nodded. "Just do it. Also, don't tell my parents that I didn't get bloodletting." "Very well, Your Highness." After all this busyness, and with the fever, Joseph soon fell into a deep sleep. He didn't know how long he had been sleeping when he vaguely felt a soft hand touching his forehead. He opened his eyes with effort and saw clear, light green eyes like lake water and an elegantly curved nose. Joseph moved back a little, and only then did he see that it was a girl of 17 or 18, but she had painted her lips with a brownish-yellow substance, wore a heavy white wig, and was dressed in a man's dark green hunting suit and black breeches, like a mischievous little girl who had stolen her father's clothes. "Your Highness, I'm sorry for waking you." The girl bowed and then turned her head. "Dr. Lamarck, His Highness has a very bad fever." A middle-aged man with tousled hair, a simple light gray long coat, a gaunt face, a protruding nose, and light green eyes came over and gestured. "Purnell, please take His Highness's temperature." "Yes, doctor."
Dr. Lamarck saluted Joseph and then pulled up the sleeves of both of his arms, one after the other, to check. He frowned. "Your Highness, Dr. Lasserre told me that he had already performed bloodletting on you, but it's clear he wasn't telling the truth." Joseph sat up, feeling very dizzy. Purnell held him with one hand and said softly, "Your Highness, please open your mouth. Be careful not to bite down." Joseph groggily opened his mouth, and a thick glass thermometer was placed inside. 10 minutes later, Purnell took out the thermometer and looked at Lamarck with some worry. "Doctor, it's 38.6 degrees." Chapter 18. Lamarck's Shock. Lamarck immediately took out a small knife and a copper basin from his leather case and said to Purnell, "Get ready to perform bloodletting on the Crown Prince." Joseph said resolutely, "Don't! I strictly forbid you from performing bloodletting." Lamarck looked at his weak expression and said seriously, "Your Highness, I must do this. A fever that lasts too long will have serious consequences." Joseph struggled to get his saber, and Lamarck said again, "If you refuse treatment, I will report this to Her Majesty the Queen." Joseph's head was spinning. He was trying to figure out how to persuade this hardliner when Lasserre entered, holding a glass bottle. "Your Highness, this is what you wanted." Lasserre seemed a bit guilty as he handed the bottle over and stammered, It might not be very well purified." Joseph looked at the gray, viscous substance in the bottle. He opened the cap and immediately smelled a strong alcohol scent. He smiled bitterly to himself. How was this not very well purified? But he still comforted the doctor. "This is your first time doing this. This is already very good. Thank you very much." Joseph was about to take the salicin when he suddenly had a thought. He looked at Lamarck and said, "Mr. Lamarck, if I accept your bloodletting treatment, how long will it take for the fever to go down?" Lamarck thought for a moment. "Perhaps his temperature will return to normal tonight, or maybe tomorrow morning." Joseph held up the glass bottle and gestured with it. "With the medicine I formulated, the fever will be gone in an hour." Lamarck felt that his professional dignity had been challenged. He immediately shook his head. "Your Highness, your pneumonia is not under control. Among all the medicines I know of, there is absolutely nothing that can reduce a fever that quickly." He was a member of the French Academy of Sciences, a famous European biologist and pharmacist. He was a great authority who first proposed the theories of biological evolution and survival of the fittest. He was also the most prestigious doctor in France and had complete confidence in what he was saying. Joseph smiled wearily. "Then let's make a bet. If my fever goes down in an hour, you are not allowed to use bloodletting on me ever again." Lamarck was slightly stunned. Then he nodded confidently. "Very well, Your Highness. If your medicine isn't that effective, you can't refuse any of a doctor's treatments from now on." "Deal." Joseph poured out a spoonful of salicin and swallowed it. It was very bitter and had a strong alcoholic smell, which made him dry heave.
Lamarck took out his pocket watch with great care and showed it to Joseph. "Your Highness, it is 4:21 p.m. now." Joseph nodded. He wanted to sleep a little more, but there were 3 people standing by the bed, one of whom was a girl, which made him feel a little awkward. So he simply got up and started discussing the purification of salicin with Lasseret. Lamarck, who was listening on the side, heard that the medicine was made from willow bark and secretly shook his head. The British had studied the medicinal properties of willow bark more than 10 years ago. Although it had an antipyretic effect, it required taking it for several days in a row to work. Moreover, it was very unfriendly to the stomach, and many people would give up on it due to stomach pain before their fever was gone. However, he was extremely impressed by the Crown Prince's theoretical knowledge of experimentation. It was far better than that of his own students. If the Crown Prince were to focus on pharmaceutics or experimental science, he would definitely achieve great things. In fact, Joseph was a novice in this area. He had only been influenced a little by a chemistry major he knew in his college dorm, but in the 18th century, he seemed very professional. So cooling it to precipitate it out can be even faster. Joseph was in the middle of talking when he suddenly stopped. He rubbed his forehead and smiled at Lamarck. "Mr. Lamarck, I think my fever is gone." Lamarck was listening to him talk about the experiment so intently that he almost forgot about the bet. He quickly looked at his pocket watch. It was 4:58 p.m., just 37 minutes since the Crown Prince took the medicine. He looked at Joseph again, saw the light in his eyes, and quickly bowed. He reached out and felt his forehead. It was indeed no longer hot. "Purnell, the thermometer." Lamarck took the thermometer, put it in the Crown Prince's mouth, waited a while, and then took it out to check it himself. His eyes were full of disbelief. 36.8 degrees Celsius. His body temperature had returned to normal. How is this possible?" he muttered to himself. He suddenly grabbed Joseph's shoulder excitedly. "Your Highness, was what you just drank really a willow bark extract?" Joseph smiled and nodded. "I can't believe the effect is this good after purification." Lamarck's eyes were twinkling. "Your Highness, if the efficacy of this medicine is stable, it will definitely be a groundbreaking drug. Can I try to prepare this medicine?" "Of course. Let Mr. Lasserre tell you the specific process." "I can't even describe my gratitude to you." Lamarck bowed deeply to Joseph, fumbled for his notebook, and went to find Lasserre. He then turned back and asked, "Your Highness, did you invent this medicine?" Joseph was stunned for a moment and then said offhandedly, "It must have been a revelation from God that gave me a flash of inspiration." Oh my God, Lamarck was shocked in his heart. Could it be that His Highness was truly the son of divine favor? He could come up with such a medicine just from a flash of inspiration. But as a rigorous scientist, he felt that he should still conduct a large number of experiments to truly confirm the drug's efficacy. With this thought, he was immediately filled with fighting spirit. He pulled Lasserre and headed to the alchemy lab, leaving behind a single sentence. "Purnell, keep an eye on His Highness's condition at all times. Inform me immediately if there are any changes." "Yes, doctor." 2 days later. After being treated with salicin, Joseph's condition had stabilized a lot. Although he was still coughing a little, he hadn't had a fever again. He stepped into the golden door of the East Hall conference room of the Palace of Versailles before 9 a.m., a few minutes before the cabinet meeting was scheduled to begin. The other cabinet ministers were all there. When they saw the Crown Prince enter, they all stood up to salute him. The Minister of the Interior, Maurepas, came forward with a huge smile on his face and whispered, "Thank you, Your Highness. The edict for Guizot's punishment was issued yesterday, and it didn't mention inciting rebellion." Joseph smiled and pulled him to a seat. Yesterday at lunch, he had said a few words to the Queen, basically putting all the blame on Guizot. Later, he had his secretary add a formal report, and the matter was considered settled.
Although Joseph felt there might be more to the story with Guizot, he thought it had nothing to do with Maurepas. Once his intelligence agency was established, this would be the first thing to investigate. Maurepas suddenly stood up, spread his arms, and said in a loud voice to everyone, "The police reforms led by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince have achieved remarkable results. As we all know, the criminals in the Saint-Antoine district have been almost completely eliminated. His Highness is truly worthy of the name Son of Divine Favor. Let us all congratulate His Highness." End of this chapter. Chapter 19. Assistant to the Minister of Finance. The cabinet ministers, regardless of what they were thinking in their hearts, all stood up and offered their congratulations to the Crown Prince, a non-stop stream of flattery. As Joseph was politely returning their greetings, the golden doors of the hall were pushed open, and the voice of the Master of Ceremonies came through. "His Majesty the King and Her Majesty the Queen have arrived." The ministers in the room were surprised to see the king, who rarely attended a cabinet meeting. They quickly turned to Louis XVI and Queen Marie, who were entering the hall, and respectfully saluted with their hands on their chests. Louis XVI was very familiar with the cabinet ministers, so his social anxiety was not as pronounced. He smiled and said, "You are always so diligent. Oh, can anyone tell me what you were just talking about?" Maurepas immediately said with a big smile, "Your Majesty, we were just expressing our admiration for the brilliant results achieved by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince in his police reforms." Louis XVI and the Queen took their seats at the head of the meeting table, their faces filled with undisguised joy. This was especially true for Queen Marie, who, once again, took the time to recount all of Joseph's recent amazing feats. Maurepas saw that the atmosphere was just right. He gave Joseph a meaningful look, cleared his throat twice, and stood up. "Her Majesty the Queen, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, has fully demonstrated his extraordinary talent during his time in the police bureau. This humble servant recalls that you once said that if His Highness did an excellent job at City Hall, you would let him serve as the assistant to the Minister of Finance." Queen Marie nodded with a smile. The Minister of Justice, Sumiol, frowned slightly. He glanced sideways at the Duke of Orleans, and when he saw that he was unmoved, he pretended to be muttering to himself. His Majesty only said he would allow the Crown Prince to have contact with financial affairs. But his voice was just loud enough for the people around him to barely hear. The smile on Queen Marie's face faded. Her gaze swept over the others and finally landed on the Minister of Finance, Brienne. "Archbishop Brienne, what are your thoughts on this matter?" Maurepas gave Joseph a look that said, "Don't worry," indicating that he had already communicated with Brienne. The round-faced old man sitting in the second seat rose and bowed to the Queen. He said without hesitation, "Your Majesty, I believe His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is fully capable of being the assistant to the Minister of Finance." He was the Archbishop of Toulouse, the Chief Minister of the Cabinet, and also the Minister of Finance. Since even he had nodded, the others naturally had no objections. A smile returned to Queen Marie's face. Just as she was about to announce the decision to appoint him, she heard Brienne say again, "Your Highness, the current financial issues are of great importance, and Your Highness is rather lacking in experience in this area. Therefore, I request to have the final say on all financial policies. The Crown Prince cannot handle financial matters without my approval. I hope Your Majesties will grant this." Joseph smiled bitterly to himself. "How afraid are you that I'll ruin the country's finances? Who else but me can save your treasury now?" He was thinking about how to persuade the old man when he saw the Duke of Orleans suddenly stand up. "Archbishop Brienne, there are so many things related to the country's finances. In the past, many small matters were handled by the assistant to the Minister of Finance. If you have to personally handle all of these, it will greatly distract your attention.
I believe that right now you should focus on pushing the new tax bill rather than being distracted by miscellaneous duties." The meeting hall fell silent. Everyone was surprised. During the last cabinet meeting, the Duke of Orleans and the Crown Prince were at loggerheads and almost got into a fight. Why was he now helping him out? Queen Marie looked at Brienne cautiously. What matters are currently handled by the assistant to the Minister of Finance? Mainly handling loans and paying off national debts, as well as the work of organizing the terms of some tax bills. The Queen's brows relaxed. These were all very simple matters. There was a long-standing cooperative relationship with the banks regarding loans, and as for organizing bills, he had secretaries and lawyers to assist him. Joseph would certainly have no trouble doing these things, and this would allow him to familiarize himself with financial matters. She immediately no longer hesitated. After politely asking Louis XVI a few questions, she announced in a loud voice, "The matters that were previously handled by the assistant to the Minister of Finance will be handled entirely by the Crown Prince. Other matters must have the approval of Archbishop Brienne. By official appointment, the Crown Prince will serve as the assistant to the Minister of Finance. Count Baladine, please prepare the letter of appointment."
"Yes, Your Majesty." Joseph bowed to accept the appointment and said a few words for the occasion. The corner of his eye caught the Duke of Orleans, and he wondered what this guy was up to. Although the Duke of Orleans's expression was as usual, he was sneering with smugness in his heart. He knew that with Joseph's recent popularity, he couldn't stop him from becoming the assistant to the Minister of Finance, so he had started planning to set a trap for Joseph a few days ago. Next month, a national debt of 6 million livres would be due. He had already reached an agreement with the bankers to suspend all loans to the government. He had already thought of the newspaper headlines, "Crown Prince's improper management leads to government debt default, triggering a financial crisis." Queen Marie encouraged her son a few words, then turned to Brienne. "Please begin today's topic." "Yes, Your Majesty." The round-faced old man took out the prepared documents, put on his gold-rimmed glasses, and said, "In view of this year's financial situation, I believe that the budget expenditures for the next 6 months must be cut again." He looked at Queen Marie, who nodded in agreement. "Yes, I have read your report, and I am in full agreement with this proposal. On behalf of the royal family, I state that the royal family will reduce its annual expenditure by 1 million livres to alleviate financial pressure." "Thank you for your Majesty's benevolence." Brienne looked at the middle-aged man with a long face and a big nose on the right side of the meeting table. "I suggest that the Navy reduce the construction of 1 battleship and 2 second-rate ships. This will save the Treasury 1.35 million livres. The Minister of the Navy, the Marquis de Castries, immediately jumped up from his chair and said in a gruff voice, "How can we do that? The English fleet has already far surpassed ours. We need to build an additional 4 battleships on top of the original plan just to barely maintain our trade routes. Not only are you not increasing our budget, but you want to cut 1 battleship? Oh, and 2 second-rate ships?" Queen Marie gestured for him to calm down and looked at the other ministers. "What are your opinions?" The vast majority of them agreed to the cuts. There was only so much budget. If they didn't cut the Navy, the cuts would definitely fall on their own departments. Compared to that, cutting the Navy was the better option. The Marquis de Castries was sweating with anxiety. Seeing that he couldn't rely on anyone, his eyes couldn't help but fall on the Crown Prince. He had heard that the Crown Prince had recently led his guards to fight against gang members in the Saint Antoine district. He should be a young, hot-headed hardliner who would support the expansion of the military. He immediately said to Joseph, "Your Highness, do you also agree with Archbishop Brienne's plan to cut our budget? That will make us even more powerless against the English." "No," Joseph said with a firm tone, "cutting 1 battleship is not appropriate." Exactly. The Marquis de Castries had just said 2 words when the second half of Joseph's sentence directly stunned him. I think all of the Navy's current battleship construction plans should be put on hold. Chapter 20. The Budget Bill. Castrie's face turned green. He stared and shouted, "Your Highness, how can you say that? The fleet is France's sharpest spear. We absolutely cannot." Joseph looked at him calmly. "Marquis de Castries, while we are building one battleship, how many can the British build?" Castries sounded a little less confident, "about 1.5. Seeing that the Crown Prince was smiling but not speaking, he became a little annoyed. 2. The British are indeed very fast at launching new ships, maybe even more than 2. Joseph nodded. In other words, no matter how desperately we build ships, we can't possibly beat the British Navy. He said something that everyone present knew but would never dare to say out loud, and a deadly silence fell over the room. Joseph continued, "If that's the case, why waste so many resources on building ships? The current fleet is enough to escort our merchant ships." He naturally knew the importance of a fleet and would certainly not oppose expanding the Navy. What he opposed was wasting money on old-fashioned, large, and useless sailing battleships. The British had a huge advantage in shipbuilding. They had many shipyards, skilled craftsmen, and plenty of funds. Moreover, as an island nation, Britain could allocate resources from its army to its navy, which France could not do. If it were a simple comparison of the number of ships built, France would definitely lose. The Battle of Trafalgar, more than a decade later, was proof. France exhausted all its resources to produce battleships, and, even with the combined fleets of Spain and the Netherlands, was still rubbed into the seabed by the British Navy. After that defeat, the British completely blockaded France's sea trade routes. From then on, Napoleon gradually entered a decline, and Britain eventually became the empire on which the sun never sets. Therefore, there was only one way out: abandon the popular multi-deck sailing battleships of the time, use the advanced technology in his mind, and go straight for ironclads, equipped with steam engines and more powerful cannons, to strike at the British battleships on a different level. But these plans could not be discussed in a cabinet meeting. At the very least, a scoundrel like the Duke of Orleans might leak the information. But Castries knew the Crown Prince was being sophomoric, but for a moment he didn't know how to refute him. He was only worried that the Queen would actually listen to him and cut all the new ships. Brienne gave Joseph a look of approval. This young man knew how to bargain, and he had just taken office, yet he already knows how to help with his financial reduction plan. He might actually be a good assistant. He cleared his throat and said in a feigned manner, "Your Highness, although our finances are a little tight, we must not give up on the development of the Navy. Cutting one battleship is already the limit." Maurepas also joined in the plea. "Our overseas colonies also need battleships to guard them, or the rioters there will cause trouble every other day." In the end, Queen Marie made the decision. "Joseph, our spending cuts should not be too radical. Marquis de Castries, for now we will follow Archbishop Brienne's plan and cut one battleship and 2 second-rate ships. However, I hope you will also carefully review the construction of the other new ships to eliminate waste." Castries's new ships were almost completely wiped out. He nodded weakly, as if he had just survived a disaster. "Yes, Your Majesty." He sighed to himself. The Crown Prince is still too young. He doesn't understand the significance of the Navy to the country and only cares about reducing spending. I must talk to him more in the future and change his mindset. Brienne had successfully taken on the most difficult to deal with Navy, and he felt a little relieved. He continued to read the rest of the budget cuts. "I'm sure everyone has heard about the situation in Holland. The Patriot Party was completely defeated by the Prussians in less than a month. In view of this, I believe we can stop giving aid to the Dutch Patriot Party. This will save the Treasury 250,000 livres every month."
Joseph frowned slightly, recalling information about the Dutch Patriot Party movement. This was an uprising led by new Dutch capitalists and citizens aimed at overthrowing William V. With financial support from France, they successfully drove out Stadtholder William V and established the States General. Later, under the machinations of William V's wife, Princess Wilhelmina of Prussia, Prussia sent troops to intervene. The Patriot Party was defeated, William V was restored, and all the money the French had invested was wasted.
The cabinet ministers all agreed to abandon the Dutch rebels. After all, 20,000 Prussian regular troops had already entered Holland. The Patriot Party's small force was no match for them, and it was best to stop the losses early. Queen Marie looked around. Any other opinions? I think, Joseph stood up. The Minister of War, St. Priest, was about to make a last-ditch effort. After all, he had invested a lot of money in Holland. When he saw the Crown Prince speak, his heart immediately sank. From the way he had wanted to cut all the Navy's new ships just now, he must be an anti-war advocate. And since the Queen doted on him so much, the aid for the Dutch was definitely going to be gone. Joseph said in a clear voice, "Your Majesty, I believe that not only should we not stop aiding the Patriot Party, but we should also increase our efforts and even take a stand to send troops against Prussia. We must not allow the Patriot Party to collapse." Oh, the Queen was very surprised. Tell me your reasons. First, Holland is the outlet of the Rhine River shipping lane. If we can control it, we can effectively contain Prussia. Second, Holland has a developed commercial sector. If we bring it into our sphere of influence, we can earn back our aid just from trade. Finally, we will inevitably go to war with Prussia in the future. Holland can tie down a large number of Prussian troops in the West. And if we allow Prussia to control Holland, all of this will become a boon to Prussia. In fact, there were two other points Joseph didn't mention. First, Holland had large reserves of coal and iron. Now that the starting gun of the Industrial Revolution had been fired, whoever had more coal and iron resources in the future would have a greater advantage. Second, the Patriot Party was very good at stirring up trouble. After they were driven out of Holland by the Prussians, they would pour into France. Historically, they had caused a lot of trouble in France during the Great Revolution. As soon as he finished speaking, the expressions of all the cabinet ministers changed. What the Crown Prince said was very reasonable, but he had been vehemently against building battleships, yet here he was supporting aiding the Dutch. Especially his words, "inevitably go to war with Prussia in the future." Did that mean? They all lowered their heads, trying not to think about the worst possible outcome. Brienne was the first to speak. "Your Highness, our financial situation no longer allows us to give the Dutch more money." Joseph said, "Didn't we just save a sum of money from building battleships? Let's give some of that to them." The Minister of the Navy, Castries, almost burst into tears. "Thank you, Your Highness." The Minister of War, however, was so happy he could cry. "Thank you very much, Your Highness." Brienne once again was glad that he still had the power to make financial decisions. Queen Marie helped him out of his predicament. "Joseph, your reasons are very valid. However, even if we give the Patriot Party more aid, they probably won't be able to stop the Prussian army."